God's grace, mercy, and peace are yours through faith in Jesus Christ. Amen. Focus is important. In fact, this is so important the auto industry has recognized it, and some cars have sensors that if your eyes go off the road, they beep. That's good. You don't want to be distracted while driving. One time, though, I drove one of those, and even when my eyes were on the road, it would go off. I don't know if it was just I'm too tall or something, and then let alone checking mirrors and blind spots, and it was maybe a little annoying. Regardless, focus is important, and whenever you're focused on something, someone or something tries to take your focus off of that and put it on something else. I mean, how often doesn't it happen when you need to get things done, there's just interruptions. I don't know that they happen any more often when you need to get things done, but they annoy you more when they happen when you need to get things done, right? Today we look at Jesus walking on the water, and it's a miracle that he encourages Peter, to be part of it. An amazing scene. And yet, in the middle of a miracle, Peter gets distracted. Isn't that crazy? In the middle of a miracle. Today we use that as a picture for our lives, and look where our focus is, how we get distracted, and receive encouragement to keep our focus on Jesus. Do we see prayer as a necessity? You ever thought about that? Not just a benefit, but a necessity. See, Jesus had his disciples go on ahead. He dismissed the crowd while he prayed. In fact, that was the reason he initially had gone away from the crowds. He had just heard his cousin John the Baptist had literally lost his head, been beheaded. He was mourning. He was going by himself to pray, and then this crowd of 5,000 men came and interrupted him. But he had compassion on them, spent time with them, and multiplied the loaves to feed them. But he would not be distracted from the necessity of prayer, so he sent his disciples on across the lake. He sent the crowd away, and then he had his time in prayer. So do we see prayer as a necessity, or just somewhere we can turn when we need help? The challenge with the second view, which we sometimes fall into, is simply look at the disciples. We're not told they prayed in the midst of their rowing. Now, maybe they did and it was just left out of the text. It isn't recorded. But how often don't we try to fix our problems? How often don't we struggle through things in life and completely overlook the access that God gives us to his throne of grace, to him, through prayer? Now, you have to piece all this together from reading the parallel accounts in Mark and in John. But the disciples had been rowing all night. Think about that, all night. They had only gotten halfway across the lake, and that's only 3.5 miles. Think about that. And it was after 3 a.m. when Jesus came out to them walking on the water. So imagine you had been rowing for 9-ish hours, and you only got 3.5 miles across the lake. Imagine how tired you would be. But it is a good picture for how things often go in our lives. Now, to the degree that we trust in God and his word, there is nothing that needs cause us worry or fear. But to the degree that we take our eyes off of God and his word, off of God and his promises, there's plenty in life to cause us to be afraid. I mean, think about Elijah. God had to tell him there were 7,000 believers that still had not bowed the knee to Baal. By the way, did you pick up on it, how God is indicating and hinting to Elijah, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be over there doing the work I gave you to do. What are you doing here? He's kind of not so subtle, and Elijah just repeats his same answer twice, not picking up on it. We're in the second lesson. Paul asks rhetorically, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? If God didn't even spare his own son but gave him up for us all, Do you think he's going to spare other things? No, that'd be silly. What's going to separate us from God's love? Do we need to fear? And yet Peter becomes a good illustration of this in our lives. Peter was doing great, walking on the water toward Jesus. And then he got distracted by the wind and the waves. By the way, this does tie in with Jesus' parables from a couple of weeks ago about the treasure buried in the field and the pearl of great price. But often, instead of making God and his promises our treasure, instead of keeping our eyes on Jesus, we take those promises for granted and look at the things of this world as treasures. But honestly, this account can also help us better understand faith itself. Sometimes we talk about faith as if it's just factual knowledge. I've had people so many times I can't even count in my ministry tell me, I still got faith. I still remember what I learned in catechism. Is faith just knowledge? Is that it? Or does it have to translate into action in your life? Think about it. Imagine if Peter's response when Jesus said, "Come," was more along the lines of, "I know you have the power to make me walk on the water, but I just feel more safe in the boat." How would that work? And Jesus says again, "Come," and Peter says, "No, thanks." Is it enough to have faith that's knowledge that doesn't actually translate into action in your life? Does that work? So it happens at times that God says something and people know this, but practically live in their life as if it weren't true. Don't worry. God tells us that. So bluntly, he tells us that, don't worry. I can't count how many times I've had people tell me I can't help it. Now, I know there's things to know about the brain. I know there's thought habits, thought patterns, right? And yet, it's not true that you can't help it. You actually can help it. That's part of the point, right? But God says, don't worry. Or rejoice in the Lord always. And yet how often don't we focus on our earthly situation and think, I don't have reason to rejoice in the Lord right now because ABC or XYZ went wrong. What a short-sighted viewpoint then, right? God is calling us to look at something greater, something better than the immediacy of our situation right now. And to the degree we get focused on our situation right now, we're like Peter getting distracted by the winds and the waves in the middle of this amazing miracle where he's walking on the water with Jesus. While we sometimes do try to separate our faith from our actions, sometimes because of habit, sometimes because of weakness, we want to continually be looking at our life and letting our actions flow from the faith we have in God, rather than making our decisions and after the fact trying to convince ourselves that they still match up with our faith. To the degree that Peter trusted Jesus and kept the focus on his word, he had no issues. But it was when he was distracted, when he saw the waves and thought about them more than about Jesus' word and promise, then he began to sink. So a few illustrations. We live in a country of freedoms, and because we have the freedom to do many things, people argue, therefore, it's okay. But does that freedom conflict with showing our faith? Sometimes people say they have conflicts with worship on Sunday morning. Maybe. Or is worship not a high enough priority? Work is often a conflict, but there are vacations and leisure and hobbies. But even if it's work, at what point do you need to say, it's worth taking a lower paying job so that you can be in church to worship on Sunday? See, are these decisions flowing from faith, or do we make the decision and then try to fit it into the faith into the equation? Is triple time or double time on Sundays the temptation why you can't come into worship, why you go into work instead? Again, I'm just throwing out questions. These are going to be vary greatly from person to person, aren't they? I can't answer these questions for you. But how many people are sinking right now? Slowly losing their faith, no longer living or showing faith in actions, letting the priority of America dictate their actions more than faith in God. In other words, is our faith in Jesus, or is our faith in ourselves? See, often we rationalize the decisions because that's a lot easier than coming to grips with the conflict in our own hearts over some of those decisions. Or maybe another application. We want to be successful and productive. But how do we define those things? You ever thought about that? We live in a busy, goal-oriented society, and yet part of that takes the focus off of marriage and family. Your spouse doesn't necessarily need a higher paycheck. They need your time, your focus, your attention. What does more money matter if your marriage implodes? Your kids don't need a better vacation. They don't need better toys. They don't need more expensive cars or whatever. They need your time. What does more money matter if they grow up and don't want to spend time with you because the whole time they were growing up you had something more important to do? Overtime and whatnot. Success ultimately is going to heaven and taking your kids with you. But that comes back to focus and priority and attention. It doesn't work if your focus is on this life right here and right now, and you assume heaven just gets thrown in. Guess what? To the degree you focus on this life right now, when the time comes, I don't know that your focus will be on Jesus or God. Right? Jesus has done everything for us. But so often we get distracted by the winds and the waves of this world. We get distracted by the treasures of this world that cause us to divert our gaze and attention away from the eternal treasures Jesus directs us to focus our attention on. They distract us from His Word. Fix your eyes on Jesus. This takes your active focus. Fix. Don't get distracted. Don't look at other things. Fix your eyes on Jesus. So, not just on Sundays. Let your priorities and goals and hopes and dreams for this life flow from faith in Jesus. You may end up with less materially here and now, but you will not be disappointed in eternity.